The road shimmered under the late afternoon heat, the kind that made the air look like it was breathing. A line of motorcycles rolled through it, engines humming low and steady, tires whispering over cracked asphalt. The bikers rode loose but together, spaced just enough to breathe, jackets snapping in the wind. They weren't racing anyone. They weren't running from anything. This was the in-between place, the stretch of highway where time thinned out and the world felt wide again. They slowed as the land dipped toward an abandoned gas station squatting beside the road. The sign above it was bleached almost white, letters long gone. Rusted pumps leaned at tired angles, and weeds had claimed the edges of the lot. A soda machine stood against the wall like a monument to a promise nobody kept. One rider lifted a hand, palm down, easing them to a stop more from habit than need. Helmets came off. Someone laughed about the heat. Another stretched a stiff shoulder. The smell of hot oil mixed with dust and sunbaked metal. It was quiet enough to hear cicadas whining in the scrub beyond the building. That was when someone noticed movement. It wasn't obvious at first, just a flicker behind the station, a shadow that didn't belong to the wind. The gray-bearded rider narrowed his eyes. He had learned, over years of miles, to trust the feeling that tugged at him when something was wrong. He took a step toward the back of the building, boots crunching on gravel. A girl stood there, half hidden behind a stack of broken crates. She looked small against the peeling wall, her shoulders hunched, hair tangled and dusty. Her jeans were smeared with dirt, and one sneaker was missing its lace. She stared at them like a cornered animal, chest rising and falling too fast. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The world seemed to balance on that moment, on whether she would run or speak or disappear back into whatever had brought her there. She raised her hand. The motion was careful, deliberate, as if she had practiced it in her head. Two fingers tapped her wrist, again and again, then pointed down the road. She repeated it, slower this time, eyes never leaving theirs. There was urgency in it, but also control. She wasn't flailing. She was signaling. The gray-bearded rider lifted his hands, palms out, a universal gesture. "Hey," he said softly, his voice carrying just enough. "It's okay." The girl shook her head, sharp and quick, and pressed herself tighter against the crates. Her gaze flicked toward the road, then back to them. She swallowed hard, and when she spoke, the word barely made it past her lips. "Please." Another rider crouched slightly, lowering himself to look less threatening. "What's going on?" he asked, careful not to rush. Instead of answering, the girl tugged her sleeve up. The skin around her wrist was bruised, dark rings standing out against the dust. She held it there for them to see, her hand trembling despite her effort to keep it still. Her eyes shone with something fierce beneath the fear, a refusal to disappear quietly. The air changed. Conversation died. Smiles vanished. Every biker there had seen trouble in one form or another, had learned the difference between someone asking for money and someone asking for their life. This was the second kind. "Where?" the gray-bearded rider asked. She pointed again down the road, then made a small turning motion with her hands, like a steering wheel. Her fingers clenched into fists, then opened, as if remembering something she didn't want to feel again. She glanced toward the road once more, panic flaring, then forced herself to breathe. One rider scanned the horizon. Another drifted closer to the road's edge, eyes narrowing. "You alone?" someone asked. She shook her head no. That was enough. The gray-bearded rider didn't look back when he spoke, but his voice carried. "Stay with her," he said. "The rest of you, on me." One biker peeled off and stepped closer to the girl, keeping a respectful distance. He shrugged out of his jacket and held it out slowly. She hesitated, then reached for it with fingers that shook, wrapping it tight around herself like armor. Engines came to life, the sound sharper now, cutting through the heat. Dust kicked up as the bikes rolled onto the road, forming a tight line. They didn't speed off wildly. They accelerated with purpose, scanning ahead, watching the shoulders, the dips, the turns. A mile down, a dull-colored van crawled along, hugging the right side like it didn't want attention. The windows in back were dark. The vehicle moved with a confidence that didn't belong out here, where nothing passed unnoticed for long. The lead biker tilted his head, just slightly. He eased up the throttle. One by one, the others matched his speed, closing the distance without drama. The road stretched straight ahead, heat waves rippling like water. As they drew closer, the van's brake lights flickered. It slowed. The gray-bearded rider pulled alongside, his bike steady, his gaze fixed on the driver. He didn't gesture. He didn't shout. He simply shook his head once, slow and final. The van drifted to the shoulder. Back at the gas station, the girl clutched the jacket and watched the road with everything she had. Each second felt like a held breath. She listened to the fading engines until they were gone, then to the wind, then to her own heartbeat thudding too loud in her ears. The biker who stayed with her didn't crowd her with questions. He offered water. He stood where she could see him, solid and patient. "They'll be back," he said quietly, as if stating a fact the world had already agreed to. She nodded, though her eyes stayed on the empty stretch of road. She had taken a risk stepping out from hiding. She knew that, but when she'd seen the bikes, real people, real noise, real presence, something inside her had decided not to wait anymore. She rubbed her wrist absently, then stopped, as if catching herself, and folded her hands together instead. The sun slid lower, shadows stretching long across the broken lot. Far down the road, sirens began to rise, thin at first, then clearer. The girl closed her eyes, just for a moment, and let herself believe that when she opened them, everything would be different. The sirens grew louder as the minutes passed, weaving into the quiet like a promise finally being kept. The girl stood when she heard them clearly, her body reacting before her mind caught up. She stepped out from the shadow of the crates, the borrowed jacket hanging heavy on her shoulders, and stared down the road. Dust hung in the air far off, kicked up by vehicles slowing, pulling over, stopping. Then the motorcycles came back into view. They rode in slower this time, formation loose again, the tension that had sharpened them now eased but not gone. The gray-bearded rider led, his posture calm, his head turning as he checked the surroundings. Behind them, flashing lights painted the road in red and blue, colors that felt unreal against the brown hills and pale sky. The girl's breath hitched, her knees felt weak, and for a second she thought she might sink back down onto the crate. Instead, she stood her ground. She had already run once. She wouldn't do it again. The biker who had stayed with her shifted slightly, giving her space. "They're here," he said softly. When the bikes rolled to a stop, engines cut one by one, the sudden quiet felt loud. The gray-bearded rider dismounted and walked toward her, hands relaxed at his sides. His eyes met hers, steady and reassuring. "It's done," he said. "You're safe now." The words landed slowly, like they had to travel a long distance before they could be believed. The girl swallowed and nodded, though tears blurred her vision. She pressed the heel of her hand into her eye, then laughed weakly at herself. I thought you might not stop," she said, her voice shaking. "People don't usually stop." He gave a small smile, not proud, just honest. "Sometimes they do." Police cars pulled into the lot, tires crunching over gravel. Doors opened. Radios murmured. Officers approached with measured steps, eyes taking in the scene, the bikes, the abandoned station, the girl wrapped in a jacket that wasn't hers. The gray-bearded rider stepped back, letting them through. He spoke calmly, explaining what they'd seen, what the girl had shown them, how the van had pulled over without a fight. No embellishment, no drama. Just facts laid out like pieces on a table. An officer crouched in front of the girl, his voice gentle, asking her name, if she was hurt, if she needed anything. She answered as best she could. Some words came easily, others stuck in her throat. When her voice failed, she nodded or shook her head instead, and no one rushed her. She glanced back at the bikers, suddenly afraid they might leave before she could say what mattered. They stood off to the side now, helmets in hand, quiet as the sun dipped lower. They looked like ordinary men again, tired, dusty, human. "Wait," she said, louder than she meant to. The gray-bearded rider turned. She walked toward them, each step steadier than the last. Up close, she could see the lines in his face, the sunburn on his nose, the kindness in his eyes that hadn't felt soft, just solid. "I don't know your names," she said. "But, thank you, all of you. You didn't even ask." He nodded. "You asked enough." Her fingers tightened around the jacket. "Can I keep this?" she asked, almost shy. Of course, the biker who'd given it to her said. "Looks better on you anyway." That earned a small, real smile from her, the first one that felt like it belonged to the future instead of the past. A paramedic arrived and checked her wrists, her shoulders, the places fear had lived longest. They spoke quietly, respectfully, like she was a person and not a problem to be solved. When they finished, one of the officers explained what would happen next, where she'd go, who they'd call, how she wouldn't be alone. As they talked, the girl looked back down the road once more. The place where the van had disappeared felt distant now, like a bad dream already fading at the edges. She knew the memory wouldn't vanish. But it no longer owned the road ahead of her. The bikers began to prepare to leave. Helmets went on. Gloves were pulled tight, engines rumbled awake, a familiar, grounding sound. The gray-bearded rider lingered a moment longer, watching the girl talk with an officer, her posture straighter now, her eyes clearer. She noticed him watching and lifted her hand. This time, the gesture was different. No tapping wrist, no pointing in fear, just a small wave. He lifted his hand in return. They rode out as the sky softened into evening, the heat finally breaking, the road stretching open once more. To anyone passing by, it would look like nothing special, just a group of motorcycles moving on. But behind them, at a forgotten gas station beside a quiet road, a girl stood wrapped in a jacket that smelled faintly of leather and wind. She held it closed around herself and breathed in deeply, filling her lungs with the simple truth that she had been seen, that she had been heard, and that when she signaled for help, someone had answered without hesitation. And that, she knew, would stay with her long after the sound of the engines faded.